Chapter 1. The Door. Mr. Utterson was a lawyer who never smiled. He was tall and had a hard face. He did not like talking. However, he was a lovable man. When he drank wine with his friends, the look in his eyes told you that he was a good man. He enjoyed his wine, but did not drink too much. He liked going to the theater, but did not go very often. He liked other people and did not stop liking them just because he had disagreed with them. He sometimes wondered why people did bad things. He could not understand it. He thought it was too much trouble to be bad. He would much rather help people than argue with them. They would come to his office when they were in trouble, and he was always ready to help them. Mr. Utterson was a very popular man because of his kindness. He had many friends that he knew for many years. Mr. Enfield was a well-known man in the town. Mr. Utterson and Mr. Enfield went for a walk together every Sunday. People did not understand how they could enjoy themselves. The two men walked quietly and hardly spoke to each other as they walked. Both of them, however, thought that these walks were important and did not often miss one. They would put off other pleasures or even business rather than miss their walk. On one of these Sunday strolls, they walked down a small street in a busy part of London. During the week, it was very busy on this street, but on Sundays it was much quieter. The houses on this street were good houses. The owners kept them clean and nicely painted. It was a pleasant street. 2 houses away from the corner, there was a building that was different from all the others. It was 2 stories high. It had no windows to the street. On the ground floor, there was a door. This door had no bell or knocker. It seemed that nobody ever used this door. Children played near it, and tramps slept there at night, but it was never cleaned or painted. Mr. Utterson and Mr. Enfield walked past this door on the other side of the street. Mr. Enfield pointed at the door.
"Have you ever noticed that door?"
asked Mr. Enfield.
"Yes,"
answered Mr. Utterson.
"that building doesn't seem to belong on this street."
"I know a strange story about that door,"
said Mr. Enfield.
"Really?"
asked Mr. Utterson.
"What is the story?"
"I went to a party one night,"
said Mr. Enfield.
"and I was walking home at about 3 o'clock in the morning. It was very quiet on the streets. Everybody was asleep in bed. It was a dark night, but I saw 2 people. One was a short man who was walking along the street. The other person was a small girl about 10 years old. She was running quite quickly. The 2 people ran into each other, and the girl fell to the ground. This was not unusual, but then the short man stepped on the girl's arm. He left her lying on the street, screaming. It was terrible to see and hear. I shouted at the man and ran after him. I brought him back to the girl. The girl's family came to see what had happened, and there was a doctor there, too. He said that she was not badly hurt. The man who had hit her stood under the streetlight. He looked like there was something wrong with him. It made you feel sick to see him. He seemed to be the opposite of everything good. We all hated him. He did not seem to care about the girl or her family. We told him that we would make trouble for him if he did not give the girl's family some money. He was not happy, but he agreed to give them £100. Of course, he had to get the money, and he brought us to this door. He opened it with a key and went in. He quickly came back with some money and a check. The check was signed by a well-known person, but I cannot tell you his name. I told the man that this was very strange. It was not usual for people to go into a strange building at 3 o'clock in the morning and come out with a check signed by a well-known person. He agreed to stay with us until the morning and go to the bank with us. We all went to the bank together and got the money. The bank said the signature was good. I was very surprised that such a bad-looking man could get a check from somebody who is so well known for being good. Perhaps the bad man knows something bad about the good man and is making him pay for it."
"Does the person who signed the check live here?"
asked Mr. Utterson, pointing at the door.
"I am not certain where he lives,"
answered Mr. Enfield.
"but this doesn't look like the kind of house he would choose."
"Have you asked about the door?"
asked Mr. Utterson.
"No,"
answered Mr. Enfield.
"It is my rule that the stranger things seem, the less I ask. Questions will only lead to trouble. However, I have looked carefully at the building. It has 3 windows on the other side. They are always closed, but they are clean. There is no other door, and nobody uses this one except the man I saw. There is usually smoke coming from the chimney, so somebody must live there."
"That is a good observation,"
said Mr. Utterson.
"However, there is one question that I would like to ask you. What is the name of the man who ran into the child?"
"His name was Hyde,"
said Mr. Enfield.
"There is something wrong with the way he looks. I don't know what it is, but it makes you hate him."
"Are you certain that he used a key?"
asked Mr. Utterson. Mr. Enfield was surprised that Mr. Utterson asked him about this.
"Don't be surprised,"
said Mr. Utterson.
"I did not ask the name of the man who signed the check, because I already know it. This could be an important story. Are you certain that everything you told me is correct?"
"It is,"
answered Mr. Enfield.
"He had a key, and he still has it. I saw him use it again about a week ago."
Mr. Utterson sighed.
"I am sorry I said anything,"
he said.
"Let us agree never to talk about it again."
"I agree,"
said Mr. Enfield. Chapter 2. Mr. Hyde. That evening Mr. Utterson came home in a serious mood and did not enjoy his dinner. On Sunday evenings, he usually sat close to the fire after dinner, reading a book. He usually sat there until midnight, and then he would go to bed. That evening, however, he did not sit by the fire. He went to his office instead. He went to the safe and opened it. He took out an envelope. The writing on the front of the envelope said, "Dr. Jekyll's Will." Dr. Jekyll was a rich and famous doctor who did many good things for poor people. He and Mr. Utterson had been friends since they were at school together and often visited each other. The doctor and the lawyer enjoyed talking to each other. One day, Dr. Jekyll asked Mr. Utterson to help him make a new will. When Dr. Jekyll told Mr. Utterson what he wanted to put in the will, Mr. Utterson did not agree and refused to help him with it. However, he agreed to keep the will in his safe. This was the will that Mr. Utterson was looking at now. He sat down and began to read it. The will said that if Dr. Jekyll died or disappeared, all his money and other property should go to his friend and helper, Mr. Edward Hyde. The will bothered Mr. Utterson because he did not know why Dr. Jekyll said disappeared as well as died. Why did Dr. Jekyll expect he might disappear? What did it mean? Dr. Jekyll refused to explain. Mr. Utterson was also bothered because he did not know anything about Edward Hyde, and Dr. Jekyll would not say anything about him. Who was Edward Hyde? Why had he never met him? Now, thanks to Mr. Enfield, he did know something about Mr. Hyde. He did not like what he knew. He was very worried about his friend, Dr. Jekyll. He also knew something else that Mr. Enfield did not know. He knew that the strange building where Mr. Hyde went to get the check was the back part of Dr. Jekyll's house.
"I thought he was mad,"
he said to himself.
"but now I am afraid he is in trouble. He must have done something bad when he was younger, and this Mr. Hyde knows about it. It must be blackmail. I can't think of any other reason why he would give his money to such a bad person."
Mr. Utterson decided to visit Dr. Lanyon. He was also a famous doctor and Dr. Jekyll's friend.
"I'm certain Dr. Lanyon will know something about it,"
thought Mr. Utterson. Dr. Lanyon was a very strong man, with a red face and white hair. He was very happy to see Mr. Utterson.
"I suppose we are 2 of Dr. Jekyll's oldest friends,"
said Mr. Utterson. "Yes, though I wish we were younger," laughed Dr. Lanyon. "I don't see him very often now."
"Really?"
asked Mr. Utterson.
"I thought you were doing some research together."
"We were," agreed Dr. Lanyon. "But a few years ago, he began to have some strange ideas, and I could not agree with him. I stopped working with him."
"Do you know his friend, Mr. Hyde?"
asked Mr. Utterson. "No, I have not met anybody with that name," answered Dr. Lanyon. "I don't know who he is. I'm sorry." Mr. Utterson was disappointed. He went home but did not sleep well. He dreamed about a short, ugly man running into a small girl and knocking her down on the street. The girl screamed. Mr. Utterson woke up. Then he dreamed about his friend Dr. Jekyll. The same short, ugly man came into his room and laughed at him. Mr. Utterson woke up again. In the morning, he decided that he must try to see Mr. Hyde. What kind of person could have so much power over his friend Dr. Jekyll? He began to watch the door in the strange building. He went there before beginning work for the day, and returned at lunchtime and in the evenings. He watched and waited. At last, he saw Mr. Hyde. It was quite late at night, and Mr. Utterson was standing in his usual place, watching the door. He heard footsteps coming down the street. Then a short man walked up to the door. He took a key from his pocket and was about to open the door when Mr. Utterson came up to him and touched him on the shoulder.
Mr. Hyde?
He asked. Mr. Hyde was surprised. He did not look at the lawyer, but said,
Yes, that is my name. What do you want?
I see you are going in,
said Mr. Utterson.
My name is Mr. Utterson, and I am an old friend of Dr. Jekyll. I am his lawyer. I thought you might let me in.
Dr. Jekyll is not at home,
said Mr. Hyde.
How did you know my name?
He asked, still not looking at the lawyer.
I will tell you if you let me see your face,
answered Mr. Utterson. Mr. Hyde hesitated and then looked at Mr. Utterson. They looked at each other for a few moments.
Now I will know you if I see you again,
said Mr. Utterson.
It may be useful.
You may as well have my address,
said Mr. Hyde. He told the lawyer his address in Soho.
Now,
said Mr. Hyde,
tell me how you knew me.
By description,
replied Mr. Utterson.
Whose description?
Asked Mr. Hyde.
We have common friends,
said Mr. Utterson.
Common friends?
Asked Mr. Hyde. He seemed afraid.
Who?
Well, Dr. Jekyll, for example,
said Mr. Utterson.
He did not tell you,
said Mr. Hyde. Now he was angry.
I did not expect you to lie.
You should not call me a liar,
said Mr. Utterson. Mr. Hyde looked at him. Then he began to laugh. It was not a pleasant laugh. He opened the door and went into the building, without saying goodbye. He closed the door. Mr. Utterson was suddenly alone on the street. He began to walk slowly down the street. He thought about Mr. Hyde. He was a very unfriendly-looking man. There was something strange in his face. It made Mr. Utterson want to hate him, but he did not know what it was. He was certain, however, that Dr. Jekyll's new friend was not a good man, and that Dr. Jekyll was in trouble. He walked around the corner to a large house and knocked on the door. It was opened by an old servant.
Is Dr. Jekyll home, Poole?
Asked Mr. Utterson.
I will see, Mr. Utterson,
Poole said and let him come into the house. Mr. Utterson waited. Poole returned to say that Dr. Jekyll was not home.
I saw Mr. Hyde coming in through a back door,
said Mr. Utterson.
Is that all right when Dr. Jekyll is away from home?
Yes,
said Poole.
He has a key.
Dr. Jekyll seems to trust him a lot,
said Mr. Utterson.
Yes, all the servants have orders to obey him,
said Poole. As Mr. Utterson walked home, he became more and more worried. He was more certain now that Dr. Jekyll was in trouble. He felt sorry for him.
Perhaps,
he thought,
we can find out something bad about Mr. Hyde, and then we can stop him from blackmailing Dr. Jekyll. I hope Dr. Jekyll will let me help him.
Chapter 3. Murder. 2 weeks later, Dr. Jekyll invited some friends to come for dinner. It was a very pleasant meal, and everybody enjoyed the food, wine, and conversation. When the other guests left, Mr. Utterson stayed behind to talk to Dr. Jekyll. This happened quite often. People enjoyed talking to Mr. Utterson alone after a dinner party because he was very intelligent and serious.
I want to speak to you about your will,
said Mr. Utterson.
My poor Utterson,
said Dr. Jekyll.
It is bad luck to have a client like me.
He tried to change the subject by talking about Dr. Lanyon.
He did not like my new ideas,
he said.
He stopped working with me.
However, Mr. Utterson was determined to talk about the will.
You know I never agreed with it,
said Mr. Utterson.
What? My will? Yes, I know. You told me so.
Dr. Jekyll was annoyed.
I am telling you again,
said Mr. Utterson.
I have found out some things about Edward Hyde.
The color went from Dr. Jekyll's face. His eyes turned black.
I do not want to hear any more,
he said.
I thought we had agreed not to talk about it again.
But Mr. Utterson did not stop.
What I heard was very bad,
he said.
It makes no difference,
answered Dr. Jekyll.
You do not understand and cannot understand my position. It is a very strange position. It cannot be made better by talking about it.
Jekyll,
said Mr. Utterson.
You know me. You know that you can trust me. Tell me about it. I am certain I can help you to get out of whatever trouble you are in.
Thank you. That is very good of you, Utterson,
replied Dr. Jekyll.
I believe you and I trust you. However, it is not what you think. It is not as bad as that. I will tell you one thing. As soon as I decide I never want to see Hyde again, he will be gone. Thank you for worrying about me. It is not necessary. Please do not worry, and please do not talk about it again. This is a private matter, Utterson, and you cannot help me.
Mr. Utterson got up to go.
I suppose you are right,
he said.
Mr. Hyde told me that he saw you, and I think he was rude to you. However, he is very important to me. If anything ever happens to me, will you promise to look after him as my will says?
I cannot pretend to like him,
replied Mr. Utterson.
You do not need to like him,
said Dr. Jekyll.
I am only asking you to help him when I am gone.
Very well, I promise,
agreed Mr. Utterson at last. About a year later, there was a very bad murder in London. Everybody was horrified. It was a violent murder, and the victim was well known as a kind and good gentleman. A young lady went upstairs to her bedroom at about 11 o'clock at night. She sat at her window looking out onto the street. A well-dressed old gentleman with beautiful white hair was walking along the street. Coming toward him was another gentleman. This man was short. They met just outside the lady's window. The gentleman with white hair spoke politely to the other gentleman. The young lady could see his face in the moonlight. She thought it was a kind face. Then she looked at the other man and recognized Mr. Hyde. A few weeks ago, he had visited her house to speak to someone there. She saw him then and did not like him. Now, he listened to the old man with white hair. He seemed to be annoyed. He had a heavy walking stick in his hand. Suddenly, he became very angry. He shook the walking stick at the old man and began to shout at him. The old gentleman with white hair was very surprised and stepped back. This made Mr. Hyde angrier, and he hit the man with his walking stick and knocked him down to the ground. He continued to hit him with the stick. He kicked him and jumped on him with his heavy shoes. The young lady fainted. When she woke up, she called the police. The murderer was gone, but the victim was still lying on the road. The walking stick was broken, and half of it lay on the road. The other half was missing. The victim still had his wallet and gold watch, and there was a letter with a stamp on it in his pocket. The police thought that he was going to mail this letter when he was murdered. The letter was addressed to Mr. Utterson. The police took the letter to Mr. Utterson. It was early in the morning, and he was still in bed. He asked them to wait while he dressed and had breakfast. Then he went with them to see the victim's body.
I recognize him,
he said.
I am sorry to say that this is Sir Danvers Carew.
Perhaps you can help us find the murderer,
said the police officer. He told Mr. Utterson what the young lady had seen from her window. Then he showed him the broken walking stick. When he heard the name of Mr. Hyde, Mr. Utterson turned white. Then he saw the broken stick. He recognized it. He had given this walking stick to Dr. Jekyll many years ago.
Come with me,
he told the police officer.
I think I can take you to his house.
It was about 9 o'clock. It was a foggy morning. Mr. Utterson and the police officer went to Soho. It was not a very nice part of London. The streets were muddy and the houses were dirty. They went to the address that Mr. Hyde gave Mr. Utterson more than a year ago. Mr. Utterson looked at the house. He shook his head. Why would Dr. Jekyll leave all his property to a man who lived in a place like this? He could not understand it. They went into the house. A servant told them that Mr. Hyde was not home.
"He was here late last night,"
she said.
"but he did not stay long. He left again in an hour."
She told them that this was not unusual because he often came and went at strange times. He was often away.
"Before last night,"
she said,
"I had not seen him for 2 months."
We would like to see his rooms,
said Mr. Utterson.
This is Inspector Newcomen. He is a police officer.
The servant looked pleased.
"He is in trouble,"
she said.
"What did he do?"
They did not tell her, of course, and went up to look at his rooms. The rooms were very well furnished. There were expensive carpets on the floor and a nice picture on the wall. There were many bottles of good wine. Mr. Utterson and the police officer saw all this. They also saw that there were clothes on the floor. They saw that a lot of paper had been burned in the fireplace. Part of a checkbook was still in the fireplace. They found the other half of the broken walking stick standing behind a door. They could see that Mr. Hyde had left this room in a hurry. The police officer was pleased.
"We will soon find him," he said. "We will wait at the bank. He will need money. We will get some people who know him to describe him."
However, it was not easy to find people who could describe him properly. Not many people had seen him. They all disagreed about his appearance, though they all agreed that he looked like a bad man. Chapter 4. A Letter. It was late in the afternoon when Mr. Utterson went to see Dr. Jekyll. He knocked at the front door of the house. Poole let him in and led him to the back part of the house. Mr. Utterson knew that this was where Mr. Hyde came and went through the door on the other street. It was the first time he had been in this part of the house. He looked around carefully. The large room at the back was Dr. Jekyll's laboratory. There were no windows in this room. There were many bottles and boxes. Poole led him to a smaller room, where Dr. Jekyll did most of his work. This room had 3 windows. Dr. Jekyll sat behind a table. He looked ill. He did not stand up to welcome his visitor. When Poole left, Mr. Utterson asked,
Have you heard the news?
The doctor shivered.
Yes, I have. The newspaper boys were shouting about it in the street. I heard them while I was having my breakfast.
Sir Danvers Carew was my client,
said Mr. Utterson.
But so are you. I need to know whether you are hiding Hyde.
I promise you,
said the doctor,
that I will never see him again. This is the end of our relationship. I know him as nobody else does. He does not need my help. Nobody will ever see him or hear of him again. He has gone away and will never return.
I hope you are right,
said Mr. Utterson.
I am quite certain,
promised the doctor.
I have reasons that I cannot tell anybody. However, there is one thing that I do want to tell you. Perhaps you can help me. I received a letter from Hyde. I don't know whether I should show it to the police. I would like to give it to you. I trust you. I know you will do the right thing with it.
Are you afraid that the letter will help the police find Mr. Hyde?
Asked Mr. Utterson.
No,
replied Dr. Jekyll.
Please read the letter.
Mr. Utterson read the letter. It was signed by Mr. Hyde. It said that Dr. Jekyll should not worry about him because he knew how to escape.
Do you have the envelope?
Asked Mr. Utterson. He wanted to see where Mr. Hyde had mailed the letter.
No, I burned it,
replied Dr. Jekyll.
But it did not have a postmark. Somebody brought it to the house.
I'll keep it and think about it,
said Mr. Utterson.
I have one more question. Did Mr. Hyde tell you what to put in your will?
Dr. Jekyll looked sick. He closed his eyes, shut his mouth, and nodded.
I thought so,
said Mr. Utterson.
I am certain that he was going to murder you. You are very lucky.
I agree,
said Dr. Jekyll.
But I have learned something more important. I have learned a lesson. It has been a difficult lesson.
He covered his face with his hands. On his way out of the house, Mr. Utterson stopped to talk to Poole.
"Somebody brought a letter to the house today, Poole,"
he said.
"What did the person look like?"
However, Poole was certain that nobody had brought a letter that day. Mr. Utterson was worried again. The letter must have come through the other door. Perhaps Mr. Hyde had brought it there himself. In the street, boys were selling newspapers. They shouted,
"Member of Parliament murdered! Read all about it! Shocking murder!"
"That is the end of one friend and client,"
thought Mr. Utterson.
"Another friend and client is in danger now."
Mr. Utterson returned to his office. He sat near the fire with his clerk, Mr. Guest. They shared a bottle of fine red wine as they worked. It was very foggy outside, but the fire and the wine made Mr. Utterson feel warm and comfortable. Mr. Guest was a clever man. He knew Dr. Jekyll and often spoke to Poole. He was interested in handwriting. He believed that people showed what they were really like in their handwriting. Mr. Utterson was certain he knew about Mr. Hyde. He decided to show Mr. Guest the letter.
"It is sad that Sir Danvers has been murdered,"
said Mr. Utterson.
Yes,
Agreed Mr. Guest.
I suppose the murderer was a madman.
"I would like to know what you think about that."
Replied Mr. Utterson.
"I have a letter that was written by Mr. Hyde. We know he is the murderer. Perhaps you would like to see it."
Yes, I would,
said Mr. Guest. Mr. Utterson gave it to him, and he looked at it carefully.
"No, sir,"
he said.
"He is not a madman, but it is strange handwriting."
"It was made by a very strange writer,"
said Mr. Utterson. Just then, a note came into the office. It was from Dr. Jekyll. Mr. Guest looked at it. He put the note next to the letter from Mr. Hyde and looked at them together.
"This is very interesting,"
he said.
"Why?"
asked Mr. Utterson.
"Well, the writing seems to be different, but in many ways it is exactly the same."
"Yes, that is interesting,"
agreed Mr. Utterson. He looked seriously at Mr. Guest.
"We shall not speak about this letter again,"
he said.
"We will not tell anybody else about it either."
"I understand, sir,"
replied Mr. Guest. Mr. Utterson put the letter in his safe. This did not stop Mr. Utterson from thinking about it, though. He was still thinking about it when he went to bed that night. It made him very worried again. Why did Dr. Jekyll write a letter and pretend that it was from Mr. Hyde? Chapter 5. Dr. Lanyon. Time went on. The police offered thousands of pounds to anyone who could help them find Mr. Hyde. Nobody could help them. He had disappeared. It was as if he had never existed. The police discovered all kinds of bad things about his past, but nobody knew where he was or where he had gone. After a while, Mr. Utterson began to feel better. He was sad that Sir Danvers was dead, but he was pleased that Mr. Hyde was gone. Dr. Jekyll was more like his old self. He was friendly, busy, and happy again. For more than 2 months, the doctor was at peace. In January, Mr. Utterson had dinner with Dr. Jekyll and some other people. Everybody was happy.
"It's very good that Hyde has gone away,"
thought Mr. Utterson. A week later, he visited his friend again, but this time he was not welcomed.
"The doctor is not seeing anybody,"
said Poole. It happened again a few days later. The next day, he tried again. Dr. Jekyll still refused to see him. Mr. Utterson began to worry again. He went to see Dr. Lanyon. He was pleased that Dr. Lanyon did not refuse to see him. However, when he saw Dr. Lanyon, he was shocked. The strong, red-faced man with the white hair now looked sick and weak. His face was as white as his hair. There was a strange look in his eye. Mr. Utterson thought that he would die soon.
"I have seen something very shocking," said Dr. Lanyon, "and I will never recover. I will die in a few weeks. Life was pleasant. I used to like it. Now I am happy to leave it."
"Dr. Jekyll is ill too,"
said Mr. Utterson.
"Have you seen him?"
Dr. Lanyon held up his hand.
I do not want to see or hear anything about Dr. Jekyll, he said. Please do not say his name.
Mr. Utterson was quiet for a moment. He was very sad that his friends were arguing. Then he said,
Can anything be done? We are 3 very old friends. We will not live long enough to make others.
Nothing can be done, said Dr. Lanyon. Ask him yourself.
He will not see me,
replied Mr. Utterson.
I am not surprised, said Dr. Lanyon. Perhaps one day, after I am dead, you will find out what is happening. I cannot tell you. Stay and talk about other things, but do not talk about this.
Mr. Utterson stayed a while and talked about other things. Then he went home. He wrote a letter to Dr. Jekyll. He wanted to know why he could not visit him, and why the 2 doctors had argued. The next day, he received a long reply. Dr. Jekyll said that the argument with Dr. Lanyon could not be made better.
I do not blame him, but I agree that we cannot see each other again,
he wrote. He also wrote,
You must believe me that I am still your friend. However, I cannot see you. I have done something bad to myself, and I am suffering for it. The only thing that you can do to help me is to leave me alone.
Mr. Utterson was surprised. Only a week ago, Dr. Jekyll seemed a very happy man. What had happened? A week later, Dr. Lanyon went to bed. He did not leave it again. 2 weeks later, he was dead. When Mr. Utterson heard the news, he sat sadly at home. He went to his office. He took an envelope out of the safe. The writing on the envelope said, Private, for Mr. Utterson only. Burn this letter unread if Utterson is dead. It was Dr. Lanyon's handwriting. Mr. Utterson opened the envelope. Inside was another envelope. It said, Do not open this envelope until after the death or disappearance of Dr. Jekyll. What could it mean? Why did Dr. Lanyon think that Dr. Jekyll might disappear? It reminded him of the will that he had given back to Dr. Jekyll long ago. Mr. Utterson wanted to open the envelope, but he was an honest man. He put the envelope back in the safe unopened. He tried to visit Dr. Jekyll again. Poole told him that he could not come into the house. He said that the doctor now spent most of his time in the workroom near the laboratory. Sometimes he even slept there. Mr. Utterson tried to visit several more times, but it was always the same. Dr. Jekyll was not seeing visitors. Then one Sunday, Mr. Utterson and Mr. Enfield were on their usual walk. They came to the strange door again. Mr. Enfield pointed at it.
That story has now ended,
he said.
We shall not see Mr. Hyde again.
I hope you are right,
said Mr. Utterson.
Did I ever tell you that I saw him? I disliked him as much as you did.
You must have thought I was ignorant. I did not know that this is the back of Dr. Jekyll's house,
said Mr. Enfield.
I have not seen him for a long time,
said Mr. Utterson.
I wonder how he is.
They stepped into the yard and looked up at the windows. Mr. Utterson was surprised to see Dr. Jekyll sitting at an open window. He looked quite ill.
Dr. Jekyll,
he said.
How are you? I hope you are better.
I am not better,
replied Dr. Jekyll.
I am quite ill. I will not last long.
You must come outside more often,
said Mr. Utterson.
Get your hat and coat. Come and walk with us now.
Thank you, Utterson,
said Dr. Jekyll.
I would like to, but I cannot. I am very pleased to see you. I would ask you to come in, but I'm afraid the house is not ready for visitors.
Then we shall stay here and talk to you for a while,
said Mr. Utterson.
That is exactly what I want you to do,
answered Dr. Jekyll. However, just as he said this, his face began to change. It was very strange. Dr. Jekyll looked very, very frightened. Suddenly, he shut the window, and they could not see him. They walked away. They were both frightened. They did not understand what they had seen. Chapter 6. The Last Night. Mr. Utterson was sitting beside the fire one evening after dinner when he received a visit from Poole. He was very surprised to see him.
This is a surprise, Poole,
he exclaimed. Poole looked very worried, but did not speak.
Is the doctor ill?
Asked Mr. Utterson.
Mr. Utterson, there is something wrong,
said Poole.
Sit down, Poole, and drink some wine. Then tell me what is wrong,
said Mr. Utterson. Poole sat down.
The doctor has shut himself in his workroom, and I don't like it. I am frightened.
What are you afraid of?
Asked Mr. Utterson. Poole did not answer the question.
I have been afraid for a week,
he said. He would not look at the lawyer, but kept his eyes on the floor. Mr. Utterson could see that there was something seriously wrong.
Please try to tell me what it is,
said Mr. Utterson, as kindly as he could.
I don't dare say,
replied Poole, still looking at the floor.
I think somebody has done something very bad. I can't say any more. Please, come and see for yourself.
Mr. Utterson quickly got his hat and coat. He noticed that Poole looked less worried. It was very cold and windy. There were not many people on the streets. When they arrived at the house, Poole knocked at the door. Somebody opened the door, but not very far.
Is that you, Poole?
Asked a servant.
Yes,
answered Poole.
It's all right. Open the door.
The door opened, and the two men went into the house.
I hope things are not worse,
said Poole.
I hope so, too,
agreed Mr. Utterson. They came into the hall, and Mr. Utterson was surprised to find all the servants together around the fire.
What are you doing here?
He asked them.
Dr. Jekyll will be annoyed. Don't you have work to do?
They are all afraid, sir,
said Poole. One of the maids began to cry.
Be quiet,
Poole told her.
Give me a candle,
he said to one of the boys. He took the candle and led Mr. Utterson toward the laboratory and the workroom.
Please, be as quiet as you can, sir,
he said.
I want you to hear what is happening. If he asks you to come in, don't do it.
Again, Mr. Utterson was very surprised. Why did Poole say such strange things? They went through the laboratory to the workroom. Poole knocked nervously on the door.
Mr. Utterson is here. He is asking to see you,
he said.
Tell him that I cannot see anybody,
said a voice.
Thank you, sir,
said Poole. He led Mr. Utterson away from the door and into the kitchen. He stopped and looked at Mr. Utterson.
Was that Dr. Jekyll's voice?
he asked.
It has changed a lot,
replied Mr. Utterson. Both men were quite frightened.
I have worked here for 20 years,
said Poole.
I know that this voice is not Dr. Jekyll's voice. I believe somebody has murdered him. He shouted loudly 8 days ago. We have not seen him since then. I believe he was murdered then. We do not know who is in the workroom. We do not know why he stays there.
This is a strange story,
said Mr. Utterson.
Suppose that you are right, and that somebody has murdered Dr. Jekyll. Why would the murderer stay there? I cannot think of a reason. Can you?
No, but I will tell you something else,
said Poole.
The person in that room has been crying out for some medicine. He writes his order on a piece of paper and throws it out for us to find. 2 or 3 times every day, he throws out another order. I go to all the chemists to try and get what he wants. Every time I bring him something, he sends it back. It is not good enough, he writes. He tells me to try another chemist. I have been to many different chemists.
Do you have any of these papers?
asked Mr. Utterson. Poole took a note out of his pocket and gave it to him. Mr. Utterson looked at it carefully. It said that the last chemicals were useless. He wanted them to find some more of the same chemicals that he bought from them a few years ago. He did not care how expensive they were because they were very important to him.
This is a strange note,
said Mr. Utterson.
This is Dr. Jekyll's handwriting. I am certain of that.
I thought it was,
said Poole.
But I still do not believe that Dr. Jekyll is in that room. I saw the man.
You saw him?
exclaimed Mr. Utterson.
Yes, I came past the laboratory one day and saw him looking through all the bottles. He was probably looking for the chemical. When he saw me, he cried out and ran into the workroom. I saw him. It made me so afraid that my hair stood up. If that was Dr. Jekyll, why did he run away from me? Why did he wear a mask? Why did he cry out like that?
This is very strange, I know,
said Mr. Utterson.
but I think I see an explanation. Dr. Jekyll has a strange illness. It has changed his appearance, so he does not want to see his friends and wears a mask. It may have changed his voice. He is looking for a chemical because he believes that it will help him recover. Let us hope that he is right.
Mr. Utterson, said Poole, I cannot agree. The man I saw was short, and Dr. Jekyll is tall, as you know. I have seen him every day for 20 years. I know him. The person in the mask was not him. I don't know who or what it was, but it was not Dr. Jekyll. I believe he is dead.
Poole,
replied the lawyer.
If you say that, I must find out whether it is true or not. I don't know what to think about the note. It seems to be in his handwriting. However, if you believe there has been murder, I shall have to break down the door.
Who is going to do it?
asked Poole.
We will do it together,
answered Mr. Utterson.
Do you have anything in the house we can use to break down the door?
Poole answered,
There is an axe in the laboratory and a poker by the fire. I will use the axe if you use the poker.
Mr. Utterson picked up the poker.
This could be dangerous,
said Mr. Utterson.
Did you recognize that man in the mask?
I cannot be certain,
said Poole,
but I think it may have been Mr. Hyde. He was short, like Mr. Hyde. I also know that Mr. Hyde still has a key for the laboratory door. But that is not all. Have you ever met Mr. Hyde?
I met him once,
replied Mr. Utterson.
Then you must know how he scared people. There was something so bad about him that people were afraid to be near him, said Poole.
I felt that too,
said Mr. Utterson.
The man in the mask made me feel like that, said Poole. I am certain it was Mr. Hyde.
I am afraid you might be right,
said Mr. Utterson. Mr. Utterson told two of the other servants to get sticks and wait outside near the laboratory door.
If anybody tries to come out, you must stop them,
he said. Then he and Poole returned to the workroom door and waited. They heard footsteps in the workroom.
They do not sound like Dr. Jekyll's footsteps, stated Poole.
Mr. Utterson had to agree that they did not.
Once, said Poole, I heard him crying. He cried like a lost child. It was so sad that it almost made me cry too.
It's time to break down the door,
said Mr. Utterson. Poole picked up the axe. Mr. Utterson knocked on the door.
Jekyll,
he said loudly.
I must see you.
There was no answer.
If you do not open the door, we will break it down.
Utterson,
said a voice.
Please have mercy.
That is not Jekyll's voice,
said Mr. Utterson.
That is Hyde's voice. Poole, break down the door.
Poole began to hit the door with the axe. At the first blow, they heard a scream. He had to hit the door 5 times. Then the lock broke, and the door fell into the workroom. Mr. Utterson and Poole looked in. There was a fire in the fireplace with a kettle of water for tea. There were papers on the table. Everything was neat and quiet, but there was the body of a man lying on the floor in the middle of the room. They went in and turned it over. They saw the face of Mr. Hyde. He was wearing clothes that were too big for him. He was dead. He had a small bottle in his hand. Mr. Utterson realized that Hyde had killed himself.
We are too late to help him or punish him,
he said.
Hyde is dead. Now we must find the body of Dr. Jekyll.
They looked in every part of the workroom and the laboratory, but they could not find the body. They looked in some other small rooms in that part of the house. They looked inside all the cupboards, but they were all empty. They looked inside the cellar, but it was full of cobwebs. They could not find Dr. Jekyll. Poole thought he must be buried under the floor. Mr. Utterson thought that perhaps he had escaped through another door. They returned to the workroom. They looked at the things on the table. There was some of the chemical that Poole had bought. Then they went to the fireplace. They found a book on Dr. Jekyll's chair. They were surprised to see that Dr. Jekyll had written all sorts of bad things in this book. A large mirror stood in one corner of the room.
Why did Dr. Jekyll have a mirror in this room?
Asked Mr. Utterson.
I don't know,
replied Poole. Next they went to the papers on the table. They found a large envelope addressed to Mr. Utterson. He opened it. There were several papers inside it. The first was a will. It said that Mr. Utterson was to have all the money and property if Dr. Jekyll died or disappeared. Mr. Utterson was surprised. He looked at the body on the floor.
I don't understand it,
he said.
He has been in this room by himself for over a week. He does not like me. He must have been angry to see me take his place in the will, but he has not destroyed it.
Then they found a note written by Dr. Jekyll. He had written the date on it, which showed that he wrote the note that day.
He must be alive, Poole,
exclaimed Mr. Utterson.
He was here today. He must have escaped. Where has he gone?
He read the note. This is what it said.
My dear Utterson, when you receive this note, I will be gone. Go and read Dr. Lanyon's letter. If you want to learn more after that, you can read my story. I am your unhappy friend, Henry Jekyll.
There was another envelope, which Mr. Utterson put in his pocket.
It is 10 o'clock, Poole,
he said.
I will go home and read these letters. I will return before midnight, and then we will call the police.
Chapter 7. Dr. Lanyon's Letter. Mr. Utterson sat down to read Dr. Lanyon's letter. It read, 5 days ago, I had dinner with Dr. Jekyll and had some other guests at his house. It was a very pleasant dinner. The next evening, I received a letter from Dr. Jekyll. I was surprised to receive it. We did not usually send each other letters, although we spoke often. I wondered why he had sent me a letter when he had spoken to me just the night before. When I opened the letter and read it, I was even more surprised. This is what it said.
Dear Lanyon, you are one of my oldest friends. We have sometimes disagreed about our work, but we have never stopped being friends. I would always help you if you needed me. I am certain that you would help me if I needed you. Lanyon, I need you now. If you cannot help me tonight, I will lose everything. It is the most important night in my life. I suppose you think I will ask you to do something bad or dishonest. You can decide for yourself when you read what I want you to do. Whatever you are doing tonight, I want you to stop. I want you to take this letter and go straight to my house. Poole is waiting for you with a locksmith. He knows what to do. He will take you to my workroom. The door is locked. Ask the locksmith to unlock it. Go in, but go in alone. Go to the cupboard next to the table. Open the 4th drawer from the top and take it out of the cupboard. You can break the lock on the drawer if necessary. Leave everything in it exactly as it is. Bring it all to your house. That is the first part of my request. There is a second part. When you have completed the first part, please wait alone in your office. At midnight, a man will come and knock on your door. He will say my name. Give him the drawer that you took from my cupboard with everything in it. That is all I ask you to do. You will soon understand how important these things are to me. I know these requests may seem strange, but if you do not do them, I may die. If this letter does not arrive until tomorrow morning, please do it all then. The man will still come at midnight. If nobody comes, you know that you will never see your friend Jekyll again. I am certain of your friendship and know that you will help me. I cannot imagine what will happen to me if you do not help. If you help me, my troubles will disappear. Please help your friend, Henry Jekyll.
When I read this letter, I was certain that my friend was mad. However, I wanted to help him. I did not understand it, and I could not decide whether it was important or not. I knew it was important to Jekyll, so I decided to do it. I went straight to his house. Poole and the locksmith were waiting for me, just as the letter had said. Poole took me to the workroom. It took the locksmith 2 hours to unlock the door. I went in and got the drawer. I covered it with a sheet and took it home. There, I looked carefully at the things that were in it. There were some powders made of different chemicals. There were also some liquids in bottles. One of these was red like blood. There was a notebook, but it did not have anything interesting in it. It had a list of dates. Sometimes he had written double or failed next to the dates. I wondered how Jekyll used these things. How could they be so important that he might die without them? Why did the man have to come to my house in secret? I could not understand it at all and became quite worried. I thought Dr. Jekyll must be mad. Perhaps he was dangerous. I put a gun in a drawer of my desk. At midnight, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I saw a small man. He said he came from Dr. Jekyll. He looked around carefully before he came into the house. There was a police officer in the street. The small man seemed afraid of him. I did not like him. I had never seen him before. There was something in his face that made me hate him. I don't know what it was. He seemed like a bad man. His clothes did not fit him. They were all too big for him. At any other time, I would have laughed. My visitor was very excited. "Have you got it? Have you got it?" he cried. He put his hand on my arm. "Please, wait," I said. "We have not met yet. Please, sit down." "I'm sorry, Dr. Lanyon," he said. "I cannot sit with you because I am very busy tonight. Dr. Jekyll said that you would have a drawer for me. I wondered what he would do with the things in the drawer." "There it is," I said. I pointed to the drawer on the floor, still covered with the sheet. He went straight to it. He put his hand on his heart. I thought he would fall down. "Be careful," I said. He pulled the sheet off the drawer and began to cry. I was very surprised. He asked me for a glass, and I gave him one. He took some of the blood-colored liquid and some powder and put them in the glass. The liquid changed color 2 or 3 times and gave off some smoke. He put it on the table. "Now," he said, "it is time. Do you want to see what happens when I drink this liquid? If you watch me drink it, you will see something that nobody has ever seen before. It will change the way you think. It will change your life." I told him that I did not believe anything would happen. "If it does," I said, "I would like to see it." "Very well, Lanyon," he said. "Remember that you are a doctor. You cannot talk about this to anybody else. Watch." He put the glass to his mouth and drank the liquid. Then he screamed. He held on to the table to stop himself from falling. His eyes became very strange, and his mouth opened. His face grew larger. The next moment, I jumped up from my chair and stood in a corner. I covered my eyes with my hands. I could not watch. I was terrified. There, in front of me, stood Henry Jekyll. I cannot write down what he told me in the next hour. I saw what I saw. I heard what I heard. I felt sick. Do I believe what I saw? I do not know. I cannot sleep. I am terrified day and night. I feel that I must die. The last thing I will tell you is the name of the strange man who came to my house that night. It was Hyde, who is wanted for the murder of Sir Danvers Carew. Chapter 8. Dr. Jekyll's Story, Part 1. Mr. Utterson put down Dr. Lanyon's letter. He opened Dr. Jekyll's letter and read it. This is what it said.
I was born into a rich family. I was healthy and strong. I was a good student. I enjoyed work and liked people to think well of me. Everybody was certain that I had a good future ahead of me. My biggest fault was that I enjoyed the pleasures of life too much. I wanted people to think I was serious and a very good person that did not do anything bad. Because of this, I hid my pleasures. When I was old enough to think about what I was doing, I realized that I was living a double life. Many men would have boasted about the pleasures I enjoyed, but I did not. I was ashamed of them and continued to hide them from others. The problem was not that I did bad things. It was that I tried too hard to do good things. I had success in my studies and work, but I worried too much about what other people thought about me. It was difficult for me to decide who I was. Was I the successful, hard-working man who helped other people? Or was I the man who enjoyed many different pleasures? Both of them seemed to be me. I began to study science. After a few years, I began to realize that a man is not one person. He is two people. I say two because that is as much as I know. Perhaps other scientists will come after me and discover that man is many more than two. However, it is certain that a man is not one person. Sometimes the two people that I was were in conflict. I was usually the serious man who did good things. The man who lived for pleasure was a dream that I could not always follow. I began to think about the possibility of the two people being separate. It would be good, I thought, if they could be free of each other. Some work I did in my laboratory helped me to see that this could really happen. There were some chemicals that could change the bodies in which we live. I will not try to explain my ideas and my work in this letter. There are two reasons for this. First, I have discovered that when we try to separate the two people, it causes a lot of problems. Second, my discoveries are not complete. It is enough to say that our bodies are made of our good and bad spirits. I tried to find a chemical that would help me make one of my spirits stronger than the other. I believed that good and bad spirits had bodies that looked differently. I knew that this was dangerous. If a chemical could change which spirit was stronger and then change my body, it might also kill me. However, I did not stop my studies and my tests. One night I put the chemicals together in a glass. They boiled and changed color. I drank the mixture. I immediately felt very sick. Everything in my body hurt. Even my bones hurt. It was difficult to breathe. I did not know what would happen to me. Then the pain began to go away, and I stopped feeling sick. I felt different. It was wonderful. I felt younger, lighter, and happier. I felt that I could do anything I wanted to. I began to imagine strange but pleasant things. However, I also knew that I had become a worse person. At that moment, I enjoyed that thought. Then I realized that I was shorter. I wanted to see myself. Did I really look different? There was no mirror in my room. It was late in the night and everybody else was asleep. I decided to go to my bedroom. I looked in the mirror. I saw Edward Hyde for the first time. He did not look like Henry Jekyll at all. I cannot say how this happened. I can only say the bad spirit in me was now deciding how I looked. However, my bad spirit was not as strong or healthy as my good spirit. After all, I had spent most of my life being good and much less time being bad. That's why Edward Hyde was smaller and younger than Henry Jekyll. There was something wrong with Edward Hyde's appearance, but I loved him as much as I loved Henry Jekyll. This was me too. I welcomed him. I noticed later that people did not like Edward Hyde. As soon as they saw him, they disliked him. This was because we always look for the good in other people's faces and always find some. Nobody could find any good in Edward Hyde's face. I stood for a while in front of the mirror. I still had to test the second part of my experiment. If it did not work, I would have to run away from my home and work and never return. I hurried back to my workroom. I put some more of the same chemicals in a glass and drank them. I felt the same pain and sickness. When the pain and sickness ended, I was Henry Jekyll again. I know now that I made a very bad decision. I had allowed Edward Hyde to take control over my body. I now had two spirits, as well as two appearances. Edward Hyde had no good in him. However, Henry Jekyll had good and bad in him,
but Edward Hyde made the bad in Henry Jekyll stronger. I still enjoyed my pleasures. I do not need to tell you what they were. It was sometimes difficult to continue my studies when I wanted my pleasures. It was also difficult to enjoy my pleasures when I thought of my studies. That is why Edward Hyde became a good friend. Now, I could enjoy my pleasures without thinking about my studies. I only needed to drink the chemicals and then drink them again when my pleasures ended. I got a house in Soho. This would be Mr. Hyde's home. I told Poole and the other servants that a man called Hyde would often visit my house. I told them they were to obey his orders. Then I made a will. If anything happened to Jekyll, I could still spend my money as Hyde. I began to enjoy my new life. As Hyde, I did what I wanted to do. Nobody could ever find me because I could just go to my workroom and drink the chemicals. Hyde disappeared, and only Jekyll remained. The pleasures I enjoyed were not good pleasures. Edward Hyde made them worse. Again, I do not need to tell you what they were. When I returned home after these pleasures and became Jekyll again, I was surprised that I could be so bad. However, I told myself that it was Hyde who did these bad things. It was not Jekyll. Sometimes, as Jekyll, I was able to undo the bad things that Hyde did. One night, as Hyde, I was very bad to a young girl. I was coming home after a night of pleasure when she ran into me. I knocked her down on the street and shouted at her. Then I kicked her and jumped on her. A man saw what I did and became very angry. Other people heard him and also became angry. I thought they would hurt me. I gave them a check for £100. I had to sign it as Henry Jekyll. I decided that I could not do that again. It was too dangerous. However, the problem was easily fixed. I opened a bank account for Hyde. About 2 months before the murder of Sir Danvers Carew, something very frightening happened to me. I woke up one morning. It was late and I felt strange. I felt that I was in the house in Soho where I slept as Hyde. I looked around the bedroom and I knew that I was in my own home. I smiled and went back to sleep. When I woke again, I saw my hand. It was Hyde's hand. I got out of bed very quickly and looked in the mirror. What I saw made my blood freeze. I had gone to bed as Jekyll, but woken up as Hyde. How could this happen? I was terrified. I was even more terrified when I asked myself how I was going to become Jekyll again. The chemicals were in my workroom, and I could not get there without the servants seeing me. Then I remembered that the servants were used to seeing me as Hyde. I dressed and went to the workroom. The servants were surprised to see Hyde in the house at that hour of the morning. However, they did not say anything. 10 minutes later, I returned as Dr. Jekyll and had my breakfast. I thought about what had happened. It seemed to me that Hyde was becoming stronger. He was trying to take Jekyll's place in everything. I felt that I had to decide between the two spirits in me.
Chapter 9. Dr. Jekyll's Story. Part 2.
My two spirits had one memory. However, they did not share anything else. Jekyll had good and bad in him. Hyde had only bad in him and did not care at all about Jekyll. Jekyll was interested in Hyde like a father is interested in a son. Hyde was not interested in Jekyll as a son is interested in a father. I felt that I had to choose between them. If I chose Jekyll, I would have to say goodbye to my pleasures. If I chose Hyde, I would never have good friends again. Of course, Jekyll would be sad at his loss, but Hyde would not notice his loss. Like all ordinary people, I chose the good spirit. I tried to say goodbye to my pleasures. In the end, however, I failed. For 2 months I was very good. I gave up the freedom and youth of Hyde. I enjoyed my friends again and did good things. I worked and studied hard. However, I did not give up the house in Soho, and I did not destroy Hyde's clothes. I kept them in my workroom. Then I began to be less afraid of Hyde. I wanted my pleasures again. It was difficult to stay away from them. One night I drank the chemicals again. Mr. Hyde was very pleased to be me again. I had locked him up for 2 months. Now he came out. He was worse than before. I went out into the street, and there I met Sir Danvers Carew and killed him. I do not know why I killed him, except that I enjoyed it. I hit him again and again. Then I kicked him and did other things to him. I am sure you read about it in the papers. Suddenly, I realized what I had done. I knew that the police would look for me. If they found me, they would hang me. I ran to the house in Soho and destroyed all my papers. Then I returned to my own house. Hyde was still very happy as I drank the chemicals. I became Dr. Jekyll again. I was shocked and sad. What had I done? Could God ever forgive me? Could I ever forgive myself? Pictures of the dead man would not leave my head. I cried and prayed and tried to forget the terrible thing I had done. After a while, I realized that I could never be Hyde again. Everybody knew that I was a murderer because that young lady saw me do it. She recognized me and told the police. If anybody saw Hyde, they would tell the police immediately. I could not be Hyde again. I would be Jekyll until I died. I was very pleased about this. I decided that I would do good things for people. I had to make up for the past. You know, I worked hard to make life better for other people. The days and weeks went by. I was happy. I still had my friends. I enjoyed seeing them and helping them. I was Henry Jekyll again. However, Henry Jekyll still had two sides. After a few months, the bad side wanted to come out again. I knew I could never be Mr. Hyde again. But one night, some guests came for dinner. After dinner, I went out, as Jekyll, to enjoy those old pleasures. The next day, I sat in the park. I thought about all the good things I did to help people. I thought I was like everybody else. I thought I was better than most people. They did not do much to help the poor, but I did. As I thought about this, I began to feel sick. I began to shake. I realized that I was changing. I looked at my hand. It was Edward Hyde's hand. Suddenly, my clothes were too big for me. I was Hyde again. A moment ago, I was a good man that everybody liked. Now, I was a murderer that everybody hated. If anybody recognized me, they would tell the police. I hid in a garden. As Hyde, I sat in the garden and wondered what to do. I had to get home to drink my chemicals. I did not have the key to the back door. If I went to the front door, my servants would call the police. How could I get my chemicals and become Jekyll again? The chemicals were locked in my cupboard in my workroom. I needed somebody to help me. I decided to ask Lanyon. He had never seen Hyde. But how would I get to his house without other people seeing me? How would I convince him to steal chemicals from Jekyll's workroom? Then I remembered that as Hyde, I still had Jekyll's handwriting. There was a hotel near the park. I walked there. On the way, some children saw me and began to laugh at my clothes. I looked angrily at them. They stopped laughing and ran away. They were lucky, and so was I. I might have killed them. The people working in the hotel looked at me strangely. Luckily, nobody recognized Hyde. I got a room, some paper, and a pen. I wrote 2 letters. One was for Lanyon, and the other was for Poole. I asked the hotel to send them. Then I sat in my room all day. As Hyde, I wanted to enjoy my pleasures again, but I knew that it was too dangerous to go out. That night, I went out and walked through the emptiest streets towards Lanyon's house. A woman wanted to sell me something. I did not even hear what it was. I hit her in the face, and she ran away. When I arrived at Lanyon's house and drank the chemicals, I became Jekyll again. However, I was very frightened. I was not frightened of being caught and killed. I was frightened of being Hyde. Lanyon was frightened by what he saw, but I went home to bed. I slept very deeply. Not even my bad dreams could wake me up. I woke up feeling weak, but better. I could not forget the danger of the day before, but I was at home. I could get my chemicals if I needed them. I had my breakfast. As I was going back to the workroom, I began to change again. I got into the workroom before the change was complete. I drank some chemicals, but I did not change back to Jekyll. I was frightened. I drank some more. I became Jekyll, but now I did not dare leave the workroom. I might change back to Hyde at any time. 6 hours later, it happened. I was Hyde again. I drank more chemicals. I was Jekyll again.
From that day on, I had to drink the chemicals very often. I was Jekyll for shorter and shorter periods of time. Every time I slept, I woke up as Hyde. Even if I rested, I became Hyde. I became terribly afraid of my other self. I could not rest or sleep. Jekyll became weaker and weaker, and Hyde became stronger. Jekyll hated Hyde and was afraid of him. Hyde hated Jekyll. He was not afraid of Jekyll, however. He was afraid of death and knew that he needed Jekyll so that he could disappear when it was necessary. My two spirits were fighting each other. It may have gone on like that for years, but now I have another problem. I have no more of the chemicals that I need. I bought some more, but they did not work. I could not change back to Jekyll. I sent Poole to every chemist in London, but nobody could give me the right chemicals. I am writing this after I have taken the last of the good chemicals. After this, I will never be Jekyll again. Hyde has won. Will the police find him? Will he be hanged? I do not know. I do not care. This is the end of my life as Dr. Jekyll.
Playlet, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There was no television when Stevenson wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but let's imagine that there was.
Good evening. Here is the latest news. There was a shocking murder in London last night. A man was hit with a walking stick and died on the street. With the details, we go live to our reporter, Alex Toms. Alex?
Yes, Virginia, it was a shocking murder. Luckily, the whole thing was seen by a young lady sitting in an upstairs room. What did you see, Miss Gravitt?
It was horrible! Horrible! How could he do it?
Can you tell us about it?
It was very late, about 11 o'clock. I went up to my room and looked out the window. It was a lovely night and I felt very happy. I saw an old man walking along the street. He had beautiful white hair. Beautiful it was, and such a kind face.
Go on, Miss Gravitt.
Yes. He had very expensive clothes. He was small and weak. Then I saw another man. He was young and short. I didn't look at him much because the older man was so interesting to see. When they met, the old man asked the young man something. I couldn't hear what it was. The young man listened for a while. Then he seemed to get angry.
Yes, Miss Gravitt?
He began to wave his big walking stick. He looked very bad. Then he hit the old man. He hit him twice. The old man fell to the ground. The young man was quite strong. He began to kick the old man and kept hitting him with his stick. Suddenly his stick broke. He stopped kicking the old man and looked around. That's when I recognized him. It was Mr. Edward Hyde. He ran off, leaving half the stick behind.
Do you know this Edward Hyde?
Oh, yes. He came to our house once to see my brother. I will never forget him. He looked like a bad man then. And what I saw yesterday...
I think that's about all that we can bring you from here, Virginia.
Thanks, Alex. Now we go to our police reporter, Sam Rady. Sam, what do you have for us?
Virginia, I have with me Inspector Newcomen, who is in charge of the case. Inspector Newcomen, I believe there are some developments in the case.
Yes, Sam. The murdered man is Sir Danvers Carew. His family and friends have been notified. He was carrying a letter addressed to the well-known lawyer, Mr. Utterson. We took the letter to him, and Mr. Utterson told us it was from Sir Danvers. He also saw the body.
That is very sad. Sir Danvers was a popular man. Is there any news about the man who killed him? Was Miss Gravitt right?
Yes, it seems that Mr. Utterson had also met Mr. Hyde. He was able to take us to his address in Soho. We can't say much about what we found there, but we can tell you that he was not there. However, the other half of the walking stick was standing behind the door.
Have you been able to catch him yet?
No, but that shouldn't take too long. He is well known and easy to recognize. I'm certain that we will catch him soon.
Sam, we've received a report that the walking stick used in the murder belonged to Dr. Jekyll. Could you ask about that, please?
Inspector Newcomen, we are hearing that the walking stick used in the murder belonged to Dr. Jekyll. Can you tell us anything about this?
Look, I'm sorry. I don't know anything about that. I suppose that Mr. Utterson would know, but he did not say anything like that to us. We will certainly make further inquiries about it.
Thank you, Inspector Newcomen. That's it from here, Virginia.
That was our police reporter Sam Rady speaking to Inspector Newcomen. Earlier, you heard reporter Alex Tom speaking to Miss Gravitt, who saw the murder of Sir Danvers Carew. Alex is back with us now at the house of Dr. Jekyll. Alex?
Yes, hello. Virginia, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Alex.
Virginia, we are at the house of Dr. Jekyll to see if there is any truth in the story that the walking stick used in the murder belongs to him.
Yes, sir. Can I help you?
Is Dr. Jekyll at home, please?
I'm sorry, Dr. Jekyll is not well and will not see visitors today.
But we would like to ask about a walking stick that Edward Hyde used to murder Sir Danvers Carew.
Yes, I just heard about that.
Does Dr. Jekyll know this Mr. Hyde?
I'm sorry, sir. I cannot speak for Dr. Jekyll. I can only tell you that he is ill and is not seeing visitors.
Did you hear all that, Virginia? I don't think we will find out any more here. Perhaps it is something that the police might look into later.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Sam. The police have warned people to look out for a short man in his 30s. He is very strong. There are not many details about his appearance. All that the police can say at the moment is that he looks like a very bad man, and nobody likes him. If you see this man, stay away. He is dangerous. We will bring you further news as it comes to hand. Now to our other news.